the Decred developers that launched the project were, and some of our major milestones to date. Then we'll go into the key part of Decred, which is our governance mechanism, which is split into two parts, which is our on-chain governance and our off-chain governance. Then we'll go into the Decred economy, which is Decred as an organization or a new type of organizational structure. And then we'll sort of I'll give you a little glimpse into the future on what's on our roadmap. Okay, so a little bit of context. And if you're wondering what these ridiculous graphics are, this is Stakey. He's the Decred mascot. Stakey actually represents a ticket in the Decred ecosystem. I'll cover what tickets are as we go through, but yeah. So a little bit of context on who the Decred developers are. Prior to Decred, I guess going back 20 years ago, they started working on open source development. So one of their probably more key and notable open source development contributions is to the OpenBSD project. So several of our key developers have been working on that and hacking away for over 15 years. Then in around 2011 or so, they got into the Bitcoin ecosystem and started developing and hacking away on Bitcoin. Their most notable contribution there was actually launching the BTC Suite codebase. So that was the first alternate full implementation of Bitcoin. And it was written in the Golang language. So following up from the last talk, which was on the Lightning Network, the Lightning Network actually uses the BTC Suite as its code base. Moving on from that, so BTC Suite was launched in 2013, by the way. Moving on from that, our lead developer, Dave Collins, wrote the code for something that you may all be familiar with, which is the cross-chain atomic swaps. And I believe it was in 2017 that Decred and Litecoin conducted the first cross-chain atomic swap. So major milestones to date. Back in 2013, 2014 was around the time that Decred was, I suppose, conceptualized behind the scenes. So it was actually formed by three primary groups. Two of those groups were pseudonymous. One of them was an individual or group of individuals named Ingsoc, who continue to contribute to this day. Another one was, and this is where actually the project's concept was based on a paper written under the pseudonym Adam McKenzie. The paper was entitled Memcoin 2. And that was written by a pseudonymous individual, so pseudonymception, called Taco Time. And it was actually Taco Time who originally forked Monero back in 2013, so forked Monero from Bytecoin. And they got together with the developers behind BTC Suite, then Conformal Systems, now referred to as Company Zero. And then they launched the project in January of 2016 and conducted the airdrop. So Decred did not do an ICO, nor will it ever need to. It's exclusively being proof of work mined. However, towards the beginning, there was an initial 4% supply airdrop to a handful of supporters on the Bitcoin Talk forums. And then another 4% was put into the project's treasury fund, and another 4% was purchased at above market rates by the developers for their time launching the project. Then in Q2 of 2017, we conducted our first on-chain vote. So that was our first user-activated hard fork, and I believe the first ever user-activated hard fork in the entire blockchain ecosystem. In Q4 2018, so last year, we launched our Politeia proposal system, which is our off-chain governance system. And then the next phase, which we have not yet got to, is the Decred DAO, or DAO sort of has a little bit of a cringy name, so we we prefer to go with DAE, which is the Decentralized Autonomous Entity. And that is where a very basic smart contract will be written to give stakeholders complete control over the actual disbursement of the project's resources. And then from there, it'll just be a process of continuous development. And that's precisely why we implemented the governance model the way that we did. Okay, so we'll go into the core of the project, which is the governance. Now, I do want to preface this by saying, love thy miner. So a lot of people observe the Decred project and think that, you know, we're anti-miners and such, but that's just not the case. You should love your miners. Proof of work really represents the backbone of blockchain technology. You know, a lot of alternatives do get shilled, but you know, the reality is that there really is no other method of consensus that is proven and tested to work. And those who do contribute their computing power to the network do deserve respect. And they play a vital role in the ecosystem. The issue that we're trying to address is not so much miners in general, just that where there's a diversity of interests, it's important that there's a formal dispute resolution mechanism in place. So really all we're trying to do is balance the incentives. So, you know, one of the issues with a pure proof-of-work system is that because of the high barrier that's emerged through ASIC mining towards competitive proof-of-work mining, it's sort of created a disconnect between those who do proof-of-work mining and the average general user. And the thing there is that the interests of the miners and the broader community of stakeholders aren't necessarily always going to align. And we saw that in 2017 with the Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash chain split. So our developers noticed when they were developing for Bitcoin very early on that this was going to be an inevitable problem. And they wanted to start planning ahead of time, and thus Decred was conceptualized. So how does it actually work? So we split up the block rewards. 60% goes to the proof-of-work miners. 30% goes to stakeholders for locking up a bond of the Decred currency and submitting on-chain votes onto the network and playing a role in our protocol-level decision-making process. And then 10% goes into the project's decentralized treasury fund. And again, I'll get into a lot of this in more depth as we go through. So if you were to visualize the hybridized process, you could sort of think of it a little bit like an assembly line, where just like in Bitcoin, the miners are the ones who essentially package the blocks and put them forward. The only difference here is that we have the stakeholders who, at the end of the day, I guess, inspect those. They're sort of there for quality control. So how it works is when there's a signaling period, or at least actually in general, every time a miner puts forward a block, they have to take at least 3 votes at random from the ticket pool, and then they have to include that into the block. Now, a majority of those votes need to be in favor of whatever block type they're signaling. If they don't achieve a majority, then the miner's actually stripped of their block reward, and that block's considered invalid. So it sort of gives miners an economic incentive to follow the demands of the broader network of stakeholders. Again, though, it's important to state that there's absolutely no reason why proof-of-work miners cannot, too, be just general stakeholders. And in fact, you would hope that they would be. Now, why have the staking? So the first part is for the on-chain voting. So again, it allows us to take a multi-stakeholder approach when approaching our on-chain governance process. So when we do undergo actually I'll go back to the previous graphic, but when we do undergo a signaling period, so that's when the project's considering a change to the actual code, so a consensus change. What occurs is during the signaling period, as the blocks come through from the miners, and they include these votes at random into their blocks, over the span of the signaling period, we'll tally up all of those votes that go through. And if at least 75% of those votes are in favor of the blocks that the miners were signaling, or typically you'll be signaling for type A or type B, right? So it might be, let's say it's segregated witness or anti-segregated witness. So if either or achieves a quorum of at least 75% of those voters, then the consensus change is automatically implemented. So typically we'll undergo 2 different voting periods. The first voting period is to signal support over whether or not the community want to see a particular feature developed. So we saw this back in 2017 when we voted to have development for an integration for the Lightning Network begin. Then what happens is that code actually gets written. And then the code is uploaded and is technically live, but just not yet activated. Then once that second round of voting commences, if a quorum is achieved, then that code is automatically activated. And so this is what differentiates us from a lot of other projects that that are attempting to similar governance models is that we're the only ones that do on-chain governance. So all of, as I mentioned before, all of those votes are registered as on-chain transactions, and that process is binding. So if that 75% or greater quorum is met, there's really nothing we can do to stop that change from occurring. So the other thing is it provides a second layer of consensus. And because of that, it actually makes the Decred chain considerably more expensive to attack in comparison to a pure proof-of-work system. And the reason is because in order to reliably attack the Decred network, you'd not only have to accumulate a majority of the hashing power, but you'd also have to accumulate a majority of the coins. Another cool feature that's sort of an offshoot of that is commonly missed is it also allows us to avoid messy chain splits. And the reason why is because if we were to face a scenario like Bitcoin Cash, and we underwent a voting period, 80% of the chain voted in favor of segregated witness, 20% didn't. That 20% minority would be encouraged to try and convince the majority to revert. But if they're a little bit salty and they don't really want to do that and they want to spin off Decred Cash, well, go ahead. The only problem is the second you clone the chain, you fork the chain and you clone the balances, that 80% majority continue to hold 80% and 80% majority on your minority fork. So again, in order for them to reliably maintain that fork, they not only have to accumulate and maintain a majority of the hashing power, but they have to do so the same with the actual holding of the currency. And so staking actually gives you rewards as an incentive. So it's not passive income. You do have to review and consider the various different proposals that come forward and actually place a vote on them, but you are rewarded for doing so. Okay, so this is a part that I find kind of interesting, is Decred the organization. So a lot of people commonly ask me, what is Decred? Really, to me, it's kind of a new type of organizational structure beyond simply being a currency or a medium of exchange. And so this is where our off-chain voting system comes into play, which we call Politeia. So Politeia is actually the Greek word for, ancient Greek word for a system of government. And it's the Politeia system which is what we use to coordinate the usage of the project's resources. So when individuals come in, as I mentioned before, 10% of all newly minted Decred goes into that decentralized treasury fund. And it just sits there. And then what happens is individuals who want to contribute their development expertise to Decred, or their expertise spanning a multitude of different fields, they can actually structure different proposals, right? So they can think of it kind of like a formal proposal process that someone might put forward to a corporate entity or government, right? Where they'll put in what it is that they want to do, scope of work, timelines, deliverables, and a budget and a draw schedule. Then they'll put that forward to the Decred community within the Politeia system, and the stakeholders will be able to place votes on whether or not they want to see a particular initiative approved. If it is approved and it does reach the necessary quorum, then the funds from the Decred Treasury Fund are dispersed according to whatever the proposal's draw schedule was. And so everyone who does contribute to the Decred project does get paid in Decred. And it's kind of interesting because unlike a lot of projects that didn't go down the ICO and heavy marketing route, Decred's contributor base isn't exclusively made up of developers. So about half, or a little over half, of our contributors are developers, and we have currently around 60 people contracting to the project. But the other half are a mixture of project managers, operational people, strategy. We do have graphic designers, UI, UX designers, marketers, and a handful of legal professionals. And they're currently distributed all over the world. So Decred doesn't have a headquarters. There isn't any, explicit Decred entity that governs it all. We have, as I mentioned, over 60 contributors, and the majority are in North America, as you would expect. We have quite a few in Europe, quite a few in South America, a handful of Africa, and a handful in Asia Pacific, which is where I spend a lot of my time. So where to now? So on the immediate roadmap, we have 3 primary things that we're planning to finally release this year. One of them is our incredibly anticipated, highly anticipated enhanced privacy features. Unfortunately, I cannot divulge too much about those other than that we take privacy very seriously, and that the intent here is not necessarily to be a privacy coin. So, we're not here to try and take Monero or Grin's lunch at all. It's just to add a slight enhancements to transaction privacy. Then, of course, we have our Lightning Network integration. So as contributors to and staunch supporters of the Lightning Network project, we are very excited to implement it into the Decred ecosystem. Then there's the Decred DEX platform, so our native Decred decentralized exchange. So Jake Joachim Piat, who is one of our founders and project organizer, actually put up a proposal for this that was mentioned in Forbes about 2 days ago. And that sort of details what we're looking to achieve with the DEX platform. And what it really is a marketplace platform for matching cross-chain atomic swap orders. And I know that Dave Collins has also been looking at implementing a mixture of cross-chain atomic swaps through Lightning Network channels. But I'm not sure whether that'll be featured in the DEX just yet. Then what after that? So this kind of goes back to that previous question that I addressed, which was, what is Decred? And again, it's a tough one to answer, because what Decred ultimately is designed to shift and change over time. Decred has been designed to continuously adapt to the changing demands, needs, and wants of its stakeholder networks. It's designed to last a very, very long time. And so as Chris Buirski, who is a close supporter of the project, eloquently put, Decred's killer feature is its good governance. Because with good governance, you can really have any feature you want. And if we could sum up the project in a single sentence, that would be the best way to phrase it. Because it's designed for the decision-making process over the protocol and the resourcing to be extremely fluid and extremely streamlined. You want more? Well, if you do, and you want to learn more about the project, probably the three best resources are the project's documentation. So if you want all things technical, that's probably your best bet. You can find that both up on our website, which is decred.org. You can also find it on our GitHub page. If that's not your thing, you can hit up our forums and our Reddit page. So that's where probably the best resource if you want to find a historical record of the community's activity. And then there's my personal favorite, which is our Bridge communications channels. So we do have 3 real-time communications channels, which are our Slack, Discord, and Matrix chat. We do also have an IRC, but it's no longer bridged. But the Slack, Discord, and Matrix are actually all bridged together. So if you do send a message on one or receive a message on one, it will show up on all the others. And this is actually, it's a kind of a cool place to hang out because this is where you'll get to see all of the project's operations get coordinated and managed in real time. So it is an extremely transparent project. And that's where it all happens. Coincidentally, if you do want to get involved, that's probably your best bet. That's the best first stop. The way we like to work is, very much in alignment with open source values, where if you want to get involved, find something that you want to hack away on it, and if the work's good, you'll get rewarded for it. That's very much the way that we work. Typically, how the process works is we prefer people to come in as individual contributors, contribute a bit of your time, maybe hacking away on some of the development, or maybe if you want to help with some of the marketing or events coordination, you're more than welcome to. And some of the existing contributors will take you under their wing, and if the work's good, you'll get rewarded for it. And as you build trust and credibility within the community, and you might build a report with another team of contributors, or you might even want to bring your own along to the party, you're more than welcome to then structure it into a larger proposal, which is when you'd put that up towards Politeia. So typically you'd only want to go to Politeia if you are considering a larger initiative with a more substantial budget. Okay, now that's the end of the presentation for today. However, I am more than happy to take any questions if there are any. Yes, good sir. Yep. Sure. So it's partially on-chain. I mean, you are still voting according to your coin balance. So there is still an on-chain element. It's kind of a mixture of Git-based timestamping meets DCR time, or yeah. It's blockchain-based timestamping. So a lot of it occurs off-chain, but then it's anchored on-chain.
Just to follow up that, it's the only punishment for not putting your proposal, your application, so you don't get another chance through the system?
So typically what happens is a lot of, you're talking about purely the proposal system initiatives? Yeah. So what'll typically happen is we prefer to reimburse retrospectively. So normally your resources will be unlocked upon completion of an initiative or as it goes along. However, there may be some circumstances where partial funding is provided up front, and that has happened. In fact, our first ever proposal that went up was 2 competing PR firms, and part of those funds were released up front. But I think in that particular circumstance, it was because the entity that submitted the proposal was a known and registered entity where there was sort of legal recourse if it was necessary. Yes, good sir. Sure. Sure. So how it works is when, as a stakeholder, what you can do is you can, through the wallet interface or through our CLI wallet, you can actually, there'll be a section where it has a bunch of different proposals and voting options. So you can either vote yes, no, or abstain. What happens is you have to lock up a portion of Decred, and that's what we call the ticket. The price of the ticket, or at least the amount of Decred that you have to lock up, depends on how many individuals are staking at any one given moment. So what we want is a target ticket pool size of just under 41,000 tickets. So that's 41,000 votes. As we approach 41,000, the price per ticket increases. Therefore, the rewards per vote decrease. As we move away from 41,000, so fewer people are staking or less Decred is being collateralized to stake, the ticket price moves down. Therefore, you can afford more tickets per your commensurate with your holding of Decred, and therefore your rewards go up. So what will happen is, depending on the ticket price, if you have enough to submit a stake. So at the moment we have just under 50% of the network or all circulating supply that is being staked. And because of that, the ticket prices are generally around 90 to 100 DCR. So that's about $1,500 to $1,600. And then what happens is you lock that up, you signal your voting preferences. That gets registered as an on-chain transaction, but the vote actually gets, it sits in a pool. So you do have to have that node live. You can use a staking pool. They don't have access to your funds. Then what will happen is with each block that comes through, that miner has to select a number of votes at random. When they do that, those votes, the individuals who submitted those votes, the nodes, have to be online in order to verify and submit their voting preferences. So, and the reason why that's there is because it may be that at the beginning of the month you submit your voting preferences and they're pro one particular proposal. By the end of the month, your decision may have switched, and so that gives you the opportunity to do it. However, your node does need to be online when the ticket is called to vote in order to submit that preference. Otherwise, you won't get the reward and your ticket won't be included. So, yeah. It is a challenge. So most people don't. Most people, so you can choose to host your own servers with redundancies, but generally that's only going to be feasible if you are staking a somewhat substantial amount of Decred and have the technical prowess to do so. The majority do tend to opt for the staking pools, and that probably is a little bit of an Achilles heel of the project, although certainly not fatal, just less than ideal. But the stake pools don't have any access to your funds. The worst that they can do is change your voting preferences when your ticket's called to vote. But you know, there's very little economic incentive for them to do that. And even if they were to do that, it'd only temporarily damage the project. Any other questions? Yes, good sir. All good. Myself? Less so much, no. I'm filling in for Marco today. So Marco, no, he couldn't, unfortunately. But Marco, who was meant to be here, is actually the lead on the Politeia system. Yeah, I more so handle our Asia Pacific operations. All good. Yep. I'll go back to that slide for you. We have, here we go. So the three things that we're hoping to implement this year, or at least will implement this year, are the enhanced privacy features. So a lot of people have been waiting for that. That's the intent there is not to be a privacy coin, just to sort of add some enhancements. Lightning Network integration, and then the Decred DEX platform. So that's a market chain for matching cross-chain atomic swap orders. Yep. For the DEX? No, not necessarily. So the DEX is more utilizing just the cross-chain atomic swaps. So it's not necessarily intended to be an ultra-high throughput exchange or anything like that. It's more just, I guess, an interface to match the different cross-chain atomic swap orders that are coming up. So you can actually find the proposed architecture for that was revised about 3 days ago, and there's a nice Forbes article that went up on that. Yes, good sir. Politeia, correct. We call it Pi for short, PI. Yeah, typically, yeah. Correct. Yeah, so good question. And there's sort of two parts to that. On the proposal side of things, there is actually a cost to submitting a proposal on the Politeia system, and that's there specifically to avoid proposal spamming. And I believe the cost is around 5 DCR. DCR's current market price is around $17. So it's not necessarily a huge barrier, but it is a barrier. And then when it comes to more individual, smaller contributors coming on board, there's not strictly a formal process, but there is a process. And how it typically happens is you come on board, and we do get a lot of people that say, hey, I want to do this and that, and a lot of them talk and don't deliver. And if you are one of those individuals, you just don't get anything. So that's why when you are coming into the project as an individual contributor, everything is reimbursed on a retrospective basis. So as you do contribute, what will happen is you might rack up expenses. So for instance, I flew here, hotel and all of that, so I'll expense that later on, and then I'll expense whatever my time was, etc. And that'll all happen on a retrospective basis, so long as other contributors can sort of verify that you've done good work and haven't completely screwed up. Any other questions? Yeah? There you are, my friend. Correct. Yeah. It's just correct. Yeah. So really the core feature of Decred is just streamlining that on-chain dispute resolution process. And it came from the fact that our early developers, who are still to this day are our key developers, were very, very early Bitcoin developers. So they were hacking away on Bitcoin as early as 2011, maybe even 2010. Exactly. So that's where I guess Decred does differ from a lot of these different forks and new projects that are spinning up these days and claiming to be a better Bitcoin is. A, we're not claiming to be a better Bitcoin, but B, a lot of them are incredibly speculative in nature. Decred was conceptualized because they observed these issues firsthand. And it's exactly, literally the opposite of speculative. They saw back in 2013 that inevitably we're going to have incredibly contentious chain splits, and it's going to cause an issue for the ecosystem. and they weren't wrong. But whether or not it would be disingenuous of me not to claim that, or not to state that Decred's still an experiment at this point. But it's just we felt that it was an experiment worth considering. Yep. Correct. Correct. Yep. So it's sort of it's no, not necessarily. So the actual the ticket and the stake that gets locked up is your that's for the on-chain process. The Politeia is sort of a little bit softer, softer signaling. So one thing that's important to note there is, and that's where I was mentioning the. I'll just go back to the first page, which is where we have the DAE. At the moment, there's kind of three major phases to Decred's development. There we go. The first phase was the governance, so that was the on-chain governance. We've got through that. The second phase was the off-chain governance, which is Politeia. The third phase is the DAE, and that's where we actually construct a very basic smart contract that automates the disbursement of the project's resources. So at the moment, the decision-making, so all of the on-chain processes are currently decentralized. When it comes to the off-chain resourcing, the decision-making is technically decentralized, but the actual disbursement of the funds themselves is still handled by a team of early founders with the intent and goal to pass that power on to the stakeholders once we've conducted enough testing on the Politeia proposal system. Yep, so it's... do you mean in the context of the on-chain governance? Yes, that's correct, yep. So you can choose yes, no, or abstain, or you can just not vote. Correct. We don't really call them the core team, but yeah, Correct, yeah. So there is an entity that does that the treasury funds do currently sit under, which is the Decred Holdings Group. But as soon as there's no Decred entity that manages the on-chain processes, no. No. There have been a handful of contributors that have come in, or a handful of people that have come in claiming to have done work and put forward invoices for egregious, billing with absolutely no proof whatsoever that they'd done what they claim to have done. But they very quickly disappear when we start pressing them for it. There's really no incentive for anyone to not honor good work. So we haven't had a problem with that thus far. Oh, of course, yeah. Yes, good sir.
So Decred's obviously unique in its ability to hold off people from forking the project.
Yeah.
And I certainly don't understand enough about the code as to how exactly that works. Mm-hmm. But it's obviously been interesting to watch a lot of projects kind of copy and paste features into other chains.
Yeah.
Is this a feature that other projects have kind of come to you guys? Or I don't know of other projects that are interested in kind of pulling that feature into their chain. Maybe you know things I don't. I was kind of curious.
My friend, you are asking great questions. It's a great point. And the answer is so it's actually why the Decred developers chose to launch Decred as a standalone project rather than implement on-chain governance into Bitcoin. And there's sort of two reasons why. The first reason is don't try and fix what isn't certainly broken. But then the second part is you couldn't really, because if we go to how Decred's, here we go. So this is how our coin distribution works. So the block rewards. So 60% goes to proof of work miners, 30% goes to stakeholders for voting, and 10% goes into the decentralized treasury fund. The trouble with trying to implement it on Bitcoin or any other pure proof of work mined project where the miners ultimately have the say on what protocol level changes get implemented, the odds of you successfully implementing that are about zero because you're effectively taking that power away from them. I mean, there definitely is, and even these days you hear Ethereum talking about implementing on-chain governance as well. Correct. That absolutely right. It's just balancing out the incentives and taking a multi-stakeholder approach. But when it comes to Ethereum, they couldn't implement it. Particularly if they went to a pure proof of stake system, which quite frankly doesn't work. But they wouldn't be able to implement it even if they tried, because the actual initial distribution of coins themselves are incredibly important to take into consideration when implementing a coin holder-led governance process. That's actually why we split it this three ways, is because any one stakeholder group would be gradually diluted over time if they didn't continuously maintain whatever it was that they were doing. So the early developers and miners and stakeholders, we didn't want to give 100% of the rewards to stakeholders because, then they'd just be master nodes that perpetually enrich themselves. And so we had to construct in a way that A, would ensure that the distribution was fair, which is what proof of work does really well, but B, would gradually dilute people over time. C, you can't do it through an ICO, because an ICO inherently relies on an indiscriminate smart contract. So there's absolutely no way to guarantee that 99% of the supply isn't just being purchased by one group. Exactly.
Quick question.
Sure.
Not to be facetious, but
go ahead.
You said there's an on-chain. Well, you're like the core team. You guys are deciding. You're coming to this conference to verify who's actually verifying. Just join the.
Yeah, sure. No problem. So in this particular context, me coming to the conference and representing the project, yeah. So if you join in the Discord, what you'll find is that there's a whole bunch of side channels, right? So there'll be marketing, there'll be events planning, and all these different channels. And what will happen is myself, back in the early days, so I've been contributing for a little over a year now, or a little under 2 years. And when I initially came in, it was very small. So there weren't really any layers of the onion beyond the founding team. And so when I came in, I jumped into the Slack channels and I said, hey, love what you're doing. There's a lack of representation in the Asia-Pacific region. I was based in between Singapore and Australia at the time. And I said, I'd love to try and kickstart a community here and try and onboard developers in all of these different regions. And so they said, yeah, we'd love to see that. And I put it up in the forums and also the different chat channels. And again, it was quite small at the time. And I didn't see any opposition to it, right? So I said, okay, I'll just go and do it. And then I held my first Decred event back in Australia, We had a good turnout. It was a success. And then I didn't invoice for that first one. I sort of just used that to build a little bit of trust. And then the second time, I was able to sort of convince the founding developers to allow me to order in a bunch of T-shirts and all that kind of stuff and do another event. And we did, and that one I did get reimbursed afterwards. So again, I proved that I did do what I say that I did. But giving me the autonomy to travel and things like that didn't really take place until I represented the project at a major conference and sort of met up with a handful of the key contributors physically. And that was back at Consensus last year. So, you know, once they can put a face to the name, and at least in the context of the type of work that I do, it became a lot easier for them to sort of trust me to do what I do. But again, everything that I do is reimbursed retrospectively. So I can't request a cent without having proven that I've done something, provided receipts, and etc. Cool.
This might be like a question, I don't know. So the way you guys think about governance and participation and things like that, what's your ideal kind of voter, if that makes sense? Like, do you want anyone to be able to participate? Do you find that there needs to be, like, is there going to be like an upper limit to how many people realistically can or even should? How do you guys think about that?
Another really good question. So this kind of, I was actually going to include a slide on this, but this kind of addresses a common criticism or critique that people put forward to the project. They say it's a plutocracy. You know, we quite frequently get that from certain virtue signaling communities. But Decred's more of a meritocracy, right? So the point of Decred was not to be a one person, one vote democracy. And that's why there's actually a cost to participating in the governance process. We wanted people to be incentivized economically, and we wanted it to have an economic punishment, or at least we wanted people to have some kind of responsibility and repercussions for the decisions that they do make. So that's why that stake is required. So not, strictly speaking, not anyone can stake. At least they're all welcome to participate in the governance process, so long as they have enough Decred to stake. Is there an upper limit? Yes, there is. Because as participation continues to grow, inevitably the price of the amount of Decred that you have to stake, so the ticket, will grow with it. Which is going to lock out a lot of people. So, you know, as that participation does grow, staking will generally be reserved for those with a larger stake. And as for what kind of people we want, it's not really for me to decide. I mean, we want anyone who's willing to put forward their opinion and be willing to deal with the consequences. You know, it's not really for me or anyone at the project to say what views are right or wrong. We actually think it's extremely important that there are a diversity of interests. Inevitably, there's going to be in a decentralized project. We just wanted to have a mechanism that's able to enforce those disputes very easily, and where people are incentivized to make informed decisions. So it's sort of like, anyone can, strictly speaking, participate, but you'd have to be pretty stupid to if you did have an extremely considerable stake that could actually change the course of the project. You'd really have to be pretty stupid to be willing to stake that and make a poorly informed decision.
Does that number ever plan on being put down eventually, or brought down? Or is that a conversation that's ever had in terms of how much you need to buy a ticket?
Brought up in which sense? Like
like you said, there's an upper limit based on the price of.
Oh,
of,
right.
Is that something that's been considered or thought about?
Oh, sure, yeah. I mean, it's definitely something that we all know is there, but there's just no way to actually determine what that upper limit is precisely, because it's just dependent on so many variables that change over time. You know, how much Decred is in circulating supply, and you know, there's a lot of variables that go into it, and it constantly fluctuates. But a lot of people have brought up the ticket pricing. About 12 months ago, back when times in crypto land were a little bit merrier, Decred was floating at around $120 US. You know, we're now 17. Yet the ticket price was, the amount of Decred required was actually the same. So, you know, now where a Decred stake is around 1,500 US, back then it was, you know, 20,000, 16,000, which made it prohibitively expensive for a lot of people. And there was a lot of frustration because of that. But again, you know, we're of the view that we want people to have some kind of economic incentive to vote. But that's not to say that there aren't solutions that are being developed. So we do have ticket splitting features that are being tested at the moment. So we've had a handful of people that have submitted tickets that have been sort of split up in terms of what they contribute to it. But we just haven't had those features implemented in the GUI wallet, so it's not really the most user-friendly experience at the moment.
And the punishment for not participating is that I get, you know, inflated. I don't get burned or anything. Is that right?
So we don't burn the coins or anything. It's more that you know, if you were a significant holder of Decred and you placed an on-chain vote, and that had negative effects for the currency, so it was sort of a poorly informed decision, the chances are that that'll lead to the value of your Decred plummeting. So that's that's the punishment.
And the last question,
Yep.
You said so it's 5 DCR to do a proposal, or is that
Correct.
5 DCR go?
That gets locked. That gets locked away until you've sort of until voting on your particular proposal has commenced. You do get it back.
Ah, okay.
Yep. Okay, we're out of time, but thanks a lot for those questions. They were really, really good. Thank you.